Welcome to the LA Real Estate Podcast. It's our podcast on buying and selling real estate in Los Angeles. Today, we'll be talking about disclosures, going over a few different styles of houses, and Scott Groves from the LendLA team will be here with part 2 of our interview. Sarah, it's been a minute. Episode 6.
Half a dozen.
We
made it to half a dozen.
This is officially the longest relationship I've ever had in Los Angeles. six episodes, 6 dates, never before achieved.
Well, I'm still here with you, Tanner. I'll be here until we run out of tape, but it's a digital show, so we're looking
Cheers,
good. Cheers
clink.
to that.
That's the hard alcohol we're drinking in the morning here.
Yeah, it is actually 8 a.m., and Tanner's drinking a Rockstar, sugar-free.
Sugar-free.
So, Tanner,
yes,
you've been filming a movie.
I have been. Tell me about
it.
Well, I'm super duper excited about it, filming a movie. It is a mockumentary about 2 guys who figure out that religious movies always make a lot of money, even if they're not any good. So these 2 guys decide they're going to make a religious movie, but first they have to scam a church for the budget.
Oh, my gosh.
And so to do so, they have to learn how to church. And so that's what the movie is. The movie's name of the movie is Faith-Based. It stars me and my buddy Luke Barnett, directed by Vince Michelli. We've finished 99% of filming. We got 2 more days left. It's easy. As proud as I was of Hollywood Today Live and that whole show, this is going to be – now that was also years, but
right.
This is going to be right up there.
I'm so excited.
Something that I'm super proud of.
What's the release date?
Oh, my gosh. It's such a process to get a movie to actually come out. Well, and it's like anymore, you can do editing so much quicker than you used to. It comes down to distribution and sales. Right. And so we'll have a version of the movie finished by the end of July, early August.
Wow, that's fast.
But then it's about festival submissions because it's an indie movie. And so the major festivals are like January, February, March of next year, of any year. January, that's your Sundance, that's your South by Southwest,
right.
Your Tribeca, and those submissions are due like October, November, December.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited! Will you promise me that we can have a little private screening at your house?
Absolutely,
bring some people over and some popcorn. Oh, I'm so excited to see it. Okay, I know anything that you do is going to be great, so I'm really excited.
Thank you.
All right, well, episode 6. Half a dozen. Here we go. All right. So I thought today it might be interesting to speak a little about some of the types of houses we see in Los Angeles. There's lots of different styles. We're not going to go over all of them, but I think we should talk about some of the main styles. Number 1, Spanish. And Spanish houses are... they tend to have very thick walls. You almost always see tiled roof.
That's that curved tile that...
Right. So exactly, like the round tile. That's usually a red color, really thick walls. And these houses were built to stay cool in really hot climates.
Oh.
So they don't have usually a lot of windows. The windows tend to be curved. They have arches. Lots of the times they have colorful tile on the floor. Hipsters love Spanish houses.
I love a Spanish house.
A lot of people love Spanish houses.
Would you say that's the most, is it accurate to say that's the most common style of house you see in LA?
I don't know if I'd say it's the most common. You know, what's really interesting about Los Angeles is this is where a lot of cutting edge styles were actually created.
Oh.
And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But yeah, so all these different types of houses appeal to different people. Frequently, I have couples that come to me and, one person will say, I love Spanish, and their partner will say, I hate Spanish and I love mid-century.
Oh, there we go.
So it's a little tricky. If you're buying with somebody, you kind of want to make sure that you guys like the same type of house. And then also we do see houses that are a mishmash of different styles as well. But Spanish houses can be really beautiful. My personal favorite style is actually mid-century. So that goes to number 2, post-war. So post-war, mid-century, that includes mid-century, post and beam, ranch houses. You actually have a ranch.
I'm glad you're telling me that because I honestly had no idea what type of house I had.
So basically, their house is built around 1945 to the end of the 60s. People disagree, by the way, on this.
Really?
Yeah. So some people say that a true mid-century is actually only to a certain year. Whatever.
Hoity-toity.
Yeah, really?
Yeah.
Doesn't matter.
If
No.
it's 40s to 60s, that's mid-century.
Right. And I personally love mid-centuries. So what's neat about mid-centuries is they were built with the idea of entertaining.
Oh.
So often there's a lot of glass, a lot of windows. They usually have a really great indoor-outdoor flow. Usually there's a fireplace, but mostly it emphasizes having people over and entertaining. So there's usually an open-ish floor plan. There's room for people to come in and out. Just think of like a drink, a party in the mid-50s.
Oh, yeah.
How fun, like drinking martinis.
Yes, hanging out in front of the fireplace.
So classy with all your friends.
A mid-century is, this is for our LA people, Palm Springs is known for its mid-century
Oh,
homes.
absolutely. Absolutely. They have very clean lines.
And the colors.
The colors are amazing, where you'll see like
typically use.
bright pops of orange or turquoise, very colorful. I also love mid-century furniture. So when someone has a true mid-century house and they furnish it in mid-century furniture, it's just stunning. To me, that's my personal favorite.
I'm slowly but surely getting my place decked out with mid-century gear.
Yeah, and those mid-century furniture have very skinny legs. And the Eames chairs, you're probably familiar with those. Those are very popular.
I've dated a few mid-century girls.
I'm sure you have, Tanner. I'm sure you have. Tanner, focus on the real estate.
Sorry. Jeez,
focus on the
goodness.
real estate. Okay, another actually one of my favorites. I love mid-century. If I had my dream house, I would live in a mid-century. However, I also do love craftsman houses. There's a lot of craftsman houses in Los Angeles.
Now, I don't know how to visibly identify a craftsman house.
So craftsman houses were turn of the century, 1900s to about the 30s, and they came from the arts and crafts movement.
Okay.
So really people took a ton of pride in creating these gorgeous handcrafted houses. They're often built very, very well. There's a lot of detail, wood trim around the windows. They're very well built. They usually don't have an open floor plan. One of the things that distinguishes them is a bit of a low-pitched roof line. They have overhanging eaves. They usually have a porch, a shaded porch, and extensive woodwork, double-hung windows. So these are just, to me, gorgeous houses because people took so much pride in them. So when you actually go, what I love is when you find a house that has been in the same family for years and years and years and nothing has been touched. And when you go in, just the quality of the work is really incredible. And another thing to know, if you do have one of these houses in Los Angeles, it's really important if you do renovations to try and keep the original aesthetic. So, for example, if you have a mid-century house, you don't want to knock everything out and put in Spanish tile in your mid-century house. And if you have a craftsman house, keep the aesthetic of these gorgeous windows. And yes, you can open it up and you can take out a wall, but really you want to keep the trim in place. Unfortunately, sometimes we see these gorgeous houses and we call them Home Depot flips. Someone will go in, spend the least amount of money to do a flip. They kind of take all the amazing original elements
Take all the character out of it, yeah.
Yeah, and they put in an ugly granite kitchen and they paint the walls tan. And we hate tan, don't we, Tanner?
My name is Tanner, and I hate tan.
I do love to get a tan, though.
Yeah,
a real tan.
Yeah, a good tan, a nice healthy dose of vitamin D tan is one thing.
Oh, and craftsmen, too, often have fireplaces. So they tend to be cozy, very well built. Of course, these craftsman homes in LA have been around for over 100 years. So, there's definitely, if there's deferred maintenance, these can have some issues. What's interesting also about craftsmen is, obviously in LA, we have a ton of termites. These craftsman homes are really amazingly good at keeping termites out. Now, a lot of them still have some in the eaves and things, but yeah, you'll find a house that's built in 1980. full of termites.
Chewed
and
up.
then you have a house that's 100 years old with very little termites. So the wood was very strong, very dense.
It just doesn't taste that good after all those years either. You know?
Okay, so anyways, I love Craftsman. I think they're gorgeous. There's a lot of Craftsman houses. Cypress Park has a ton. And I just think they're so cute, especially when they are restored. And again, there's a difference between restoring a house and remodeling.
Yeah.
So if you can restore it, bring it back to its original character, refinish the gorgeous hardwood floors, instead of ripping them out and putting in an ugly laminate, just keeping the original floors but refinishing them, they can be so beautiful. Okay, next we have traditional homes. So obviously the name traditional, it's kind of what they are. They're traditional. They really have like a traditional floor plan, formal living and dining area, traditional comforts like a front porch, fireplace. They come in all different sizes. Some are more stories. They tend to be a little bit more cookie cutter houses, but some people love traditional houses. Okay, and then the last one is modern. And modern houses, so there's mid-century modern, but this is just straight modern. You see a lot of this in West Hollywood, up in the hills. Modern houses usually have flat roofs. They're very minimalist. They tend to be in the higher end, so some of the most expensive houses we see in Los Angeles are modern houses. And they usually, the newer ones, now this can be new construction too, modern new construction. They have usually very high-end appliances and fixtures. Something really interesting about modern houses is the very first one built in a modern style was in 1922 by Rudolph Schindler in West Hollywood.
Oh.
So again, some of the big architects and designers back in the day were in LA. So LA was very cutting edge as far as architecture and house styles, and then the trends would spread through the country.
That's been the thing that's so interesting to me about LA houses is every now and then you'll see something pop up on like LAcurbs.com or something, and they'll reference like, oh, this iconic architect built this house and it's finally back up for sale, just finished or whatnot.
I had a listing. Gorgeous mid-century house, and it was actually an original Cliff May. And Cliff May is one of the main, godfathers, you would say, of mid-century modern ranch. And it was a true Cliff May, and that was really neat. So one thing to know about all these different styles is different styles gather more interest. So there's a few houses that people absolutely love, and these are the ones really why we're talking about these ones, is mid-century moderns are extremely desirable, especially if they have original elements. Oh, another thing about mid-century moderns and ranch and post and beam, they often have exposed ceilings, which can be beautiful. You have really high ceilings, so it exposes a lot of natural light. And those tend to go, if they're priced well, in major bidding wars.
Yeah.
They're very, very competitive. And then also craftsmen as well. Well, Spanish as well. I mean, these are, I would say, the three types that I find have the most bidding wars. There's also different styles like Tudors and, other styles of houses. But really, these are the main ones that my clients always call me and ask for.
What do you think that there are? I know you were talking about, I don't remember the name of the city, but you just mentioned, do you feel like there are pockets of LA that have more of one type of house than the other?
For sure.
Like if I wanted a mid-century house, what area of town should I be
Absolutely.
looking in?
So mid-centuries, there's little pockets of them. So for example, in Mount Washington, there's a street called Sunny Heights, and all up and down Sunny Heights are mid-century houses. Long Beach has a lot. There's little pockets. There's a lot actually in the valley as well. So it really just depends. They're kind of scattered. What's interesting is when I did some research for my client for his Cliff May house, we looked it up. And back in the day, I actually found the original floor plan. It was like a Sears catalog type thing where you would pick out between 5 styles of houses and they would come and build the house. Pretty neat.
Well, I feel like my street I was one of those sort of like either
Tracks.
Sears tract houses, developer special, where they basically like had more or less the cookie cutter version of this house,
right?
And they'd build like 8 of them on a street.
And back in the day, it made more sense for a developer to build maybe 2 blocks of houses at one time. So so that's styles of houses. So when you're working with your realtor, you want to go check all these styles out and see what speaks to you, and so that when you do buy, you love your home.
All right, talking about a buyer's tip. Oh my gosh. Do people actually do this?
Oh, Tanner, I have some stories for you.
Okay, here's the tip. Don't bring your dog to an open house, and if you have kids, keep an eye on them.
Okay, so this is my personal pet peeve. Literally, pet.
This is
my
pet peeve.
Pet peeve. Mm-hmm. Don't bring your dog to an open house. I know your dog is part of your family. Mm-hmm. You love your dog. Your little Miffy is your best friend. I get it. But there is something very, in my opinion, rude about bringing a dog to an open house. You don't know if the sellers have allergies. Recently I had a listing in Silver Lake, and somebody brought their dog. And I said, I'm sorry, you can't bring your dog in the house, because the sellers had their own dog that was old, and we just didn't want, it was already disruptive. People were coming in, and he was away from the property. So she tied her dog up to the front of the house, and I was, in the back of the house walking someone through, and I could hear the dog barking and barking and barking. Ugh. And I went to the front door, and there was a woman with her 3-year-old that was crying because the dog was scaring her.
Right.
And I'm just like, common sense, people, right? Common sense. Don't bring your dogs in. It's rude.
Listen, and let me tell you something, people. Everybody listening right now, your dog doesn't have a preference on the style of house. Your dog doesn't care.
Right. And then at the same token, keep an eye on your children. Obviously, you don't want your kids, getting into mischief or breaking anything. But then also safety reasons. There might be a deck that's not secured. Sure. There might be a backyard with something sharp. So, I know it's distracting. You're trying to see the house. But it's really important to keep an eye on your kids, too, just for their own protection as well. And it's silly that I have to say this, but common sense isn't so common.
Not so common. I do support the tying of children to the front porch.
Wait, cut that out. Cut that out. Control room, cut that out. Take that out. Coming up, we have part 2 of my interview with Scott Groves from the LendLA team.
That would be the second story.
Okay, let's talk a little, shifting gears, let's talk a little about appraisals. So we've already explained, a lot of the people listening are first-time home buyers, have never gone through this process before. We've spoken about appraisals, that, whoever you choose for your mortgage, they will send an independent appraiser out to look at the property. What's the typical price for an appraisal?
So an appraisal will normally run you about $500 to $600 to have a neutral third party come out and evaluate the value of the house.
And that's somebody that is coming out that's independent, and the buyer is paying for that appraisal. So do you generally call them and get a credit card number, or how does that process work?
Absolutely. Normally in the initial disclosures, which again is just an estimate, one of the things that will happen is there will be a way to digitally pay for the appraisal. Again, somewhere between that $500 and $600 range. It allows us to contract a neutral third-party appraiser who's licensed and bonded and has thousands of hours of experience, and then they come out and evaluate the property on behalf of the buyer and only the buyer.
Right. And when we first open escrow, the first thing, so the loan package goes out that shows all the preliminary numbers and probably goes very in depth on the loan, all the terms, everything else. What else happens once escrow is open?
Great. So the first thing that should happen when escrow opens is there's a conversation between the client who's buying the house, probably the realtor, and the loan officer. Because, a lot of times, especially in our market here in LA, where the lead time from originally getting pre-approved to getting under contract can be months, things can change, right? We can pass April 15th where new sets of tax returns are due, and now we have to evaluate that. Clients do all kinds of crazy things like go out and buy a new RV with a $1,300 a month payment and don't think that's going to affect their loan approval.
Actually, this is a really good tip is, if you are spending months and months looking for a house, sometimes people forget what lenders, realtors, we always tell our clients, don't make big purchases on your credit cards without checking in with your lender. But if it goes a long span of time, people forget. They'll lease a car or they'll buy, or even get into escrow and put a whole bunch of money for new furniture for their new house on their credit card, and that can risk the loan approval. So important.
People always ask me, hey, how long is my pre-approval good for? And I always tell them your pre-approval is good for as long as you don't change any huge material facts to your credit, your assets, or your job. Your income. Yeah. So if you go from being a pay stub W-2 employee at a law firm, and then during that 6 months that you're looking for a home, you decide, you know what, I really want to go independent. I'm going to take some of my clients with me. I'll actually make more money, but I'm going to be self-employed. And then day one, we find out that you're newly self-employed and you no longer have that history on the pay stub and W-2 job. That can dramatically affect or turn your pre-approval into a decline. So I like to tell people, hey, first thing we have to do is have a conversation, see if any of the material facts of the pre-approval changed, and then let's move forward with the loan disclosures, either electronic normally or the paper package.
So all the loan disclosures. And what about, so this is something that I always also really enforce in my clients, is getting stuff back to you in a timely manner. It's a lot to read through though. So it's a balancing act. People want to read the paperwork, yet it's hundreds of pages and you need it back quickly. So we've spoken about every step that's delayed can delay, it's a domino effect, and it can delay close of escrow. What about points? People ask me all the time about buying points to buy down your rate. How do you decide if that's a good fit for somebody or not?
It's a great question. So, there's a lot of moving parts when it comes to evaluating the interest rate, the cost structure, and what have you. And the reality is 95% of consumers could read every single page of the initial disclosures and literally not have a clue what they're signing. Right. I mean, it's complicated. It's banking jargon. What always trips me out is that I have friends who will read 10 reviews on Amazon before they buy a $3 stick of deodorant. But when it comes to getting a $900,000 loan, because we've commoditized the mortgage industry and all we talk about is rate, who has the lowest rate, somebody will be derailed from working with somebody like us who gets referred from their realtor, who has a local presence, who has hundreds of online 5-star reviews, and they'll just kind of pivot to somebody else without even thinking about it because the rate appears to be lower.
Right.
So,
And sometimes, I have had circumstances where it's been a bait and switch for clients. So, for example, all of a sudden, the process is delayed and then their rate lock expires. And these wonderful rates that they were promised don't actually come to fruition.
Right.
So, reputation is very important. I've worked with your team before and you guys were great.
But I want to circle back to your original question about points, because that's where it comes into like having a loan officer that you trust overall to help you evaluate the stuff. Because I could probably talk somebody into paying points or not paying points or whatever the case may be, and I could confuse the consumer and get them to do what I wanted them to do. But the reality is paying points is just a simple way of saying I'm paying money up front to get a lower interest rate on my mortgage. So for example, let's say you have a $700,000 mortgage and you pay 1 point. And that 1 point on a $700,000 mortgage is simply $7,000. It's 1% of the loan amount. And for that upfront cost, the lender will give you a lower interest rate. Now, I've evaluated this till I'm blue in the face for myself, for clients, for friends, for family. Usually paying 1 point will give you somewhere between 1/4% and 0.5% lower on the interest rate. So you're paying that money up front in order to get a lower interest rate. But if we look at the break-even point on paying that money up front versus what you're saving monthly, it usually takes between 4 and 6 years to earn that money back. Now, the average Californian, and I haven't seen these stats in a couple years, but I presume they still hold true. The average Californian stays in their house for about 7.5 years, and they keep their mortgage for about 4.5 years. Things happen. Interest rates drop.
Refinance. They want to pull money out.
Exactly. They inherit some money and they pay it down, whatever the case may be. So this idea of paying points up front, it's normally a losing proposition unless you're getting free money from somewhere. Okay. So if the seller's giving you free money and you don't know where to spend it, or if you're getting relocation money from your company, or if you just really want to say at a dinner party how low your interest rate was and you know you're going to be in this house for 10 years, spoiler alert, nobody knows for certain they're going to be in their house for 10 years.
Right.
If you have one of those scenarios, great, pay points. But usually we're talking clients out of paying points.
That's good to know. That's really good to know because I get asked a lot about points. And it's true. You never know how long you're going to be in the house.
Right.
I think originally my husband and I bought our house, we maybe paid a point, but then we refinanced 3 years after we moved in because rates went down so low. Right. So really we probably lost money on the point.
Probably lost money.
Yeah. Wow. Downer. Okay, so back to the logistics of the deal. So, we're familiar with the CD. Can you explain to the listeners what the CD is?
Right. So the CD is the closing disclosure. And previous to, the CFPB really changing things up around 5, 6, 7 years ago, it was called the good faith estimate. Well, the problem with the good faith estimate, if we go back prior to about 2011, 2012, is consumers would get this good faith estimate. It would show one program, one rate, one payment, and whatnot. And that would kind of be the consumer's idea of what was going to happen throughout the transaction. Then they would get to the end of the transaction and the loan documents would be delivered to escrow to close on the property, and maybe the interest rate was higher or the payment was significantly higher or there was, something going on, either an honest mistake, sometimes it was something nefarious, but something dramatic changed throughout the course of the escrow process or the contract process that then made the final figures dramatically different than what the consumer was expecting.
So the person would go in to sign their loan documents and they were completely different.
They could be. Yeah.
Than the good faith estimate.
Correct. And so what happened was the government, the CFPB, this is actually, I think, one of the good things that the CFPB did, is they created this closing disclosure that said, okay, we have to give the consumer time to understand what their final cost, final interest rate, and kind of final loan structure will be. So what will happen is once the interest rate is locked, once we have more or less with a small tolerance an idea of all of the final fees and the final loan amount and what have you, the lender will send out a CD or a closing disclosure that basically has all of your final figures, and then the consumer has to have, by law, 3 business days to review that documentation, sign off on it, and say, yes, this is what I signed up for. I understand what my final payments are going to be, and we're ready to move forward. Now, what's interesting about doing business in California versus a lot of other states is that a lot of other states, if something changes with the loan or the loan gets declined, all the way up until the day that you close escrow, you have the right to back out of the transaction because maybe you don't qualify for the loan anymore, or the terms have dramatically changed, or interest rates have gone up dramatically. In Southern California, where the market is so competitive, and especially in the areas that we service in LA, a lot of times the contingency for the loan, aka knowing exactly what you're paying and the loan approval and all those things, that contingency period is going away on day 5, day 7, day 0 sometimes. So this is another reason why you have to work with a lender who you trust, and has impeccable trust, and who you got referred to, because if you get to the end of the process and the CD comes out, or you get 15 days into the process and the CD comes out and you're like, well, wait a minute, the payment for whatever reason is $300 more than I was expecting, you don't have that get out of jail free card just because of how we're having to structure transactions here in Southern California. So working with a trusted local lender is even more imperative in Southern California than some of these other markets.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Scott. You've given us a ton of information. I know that the loan process is really confusing and overwhelming to people. It's the biggest purchase most people make in their life. But I always say the first day you're in your own home and you're not paying somebody else's mortgage is a good day.
Absolutely.
And before we close that, I just wanted to ask you one more question. If people want to get a hold of you or your team, how can they do that?
The easiest way to get in touch with Justin or myself, who are more than happy to talk about all your loan needs, whether it's pre-approvals, you're in a contract and you need a second opinion, or you want to refinance to save some money or get some cash out. The easiest way is just to head over to our link. It's www.lendla.com, LENDLA.com, and all of our contact information is there. More than happy to help you. And of course, if you're listening to this, I'm a big fan of this podcast and of Sarah personally. So, we're happy to help help and be here for a consultation. And then at some point in the future, when you need to have an advocate in your corner to actually get your offer accepted, which seems to be the hard part in this market,
right, exactly.
Then we're here for you. LendLA.com.
Well, and we'll have that in the podcast description as well. Scott, thank you so much for spending the time with us today. We'd love to have you back. And again, if you want to contact Scott or his team, the information will be in the podcast description.
Buyer's tip. We got another buyer's tip for you. If you are scared to buy a house, add up the amount of rent you have paid in the last 5 to 10 years and write down that number, and suddenly buying a house will not feel so scary. That is a fact.
All right. Time to discuss the paperwork.
Ugh.
Let's talk about disclosures.
Yes.
So we've already spoken about when you're in escrow, there's a ton of paperwork. You have paperwork from your lenders. You have paperwork from escrow. Today, we're going to talk about paperwork that most of you are going to get from your realtor. And sometimes realtors have a TC, which is a transaction coordinator. I have one. It's usually just someone that works with me that helps with the paperwork, because the paperwork is pretty time consuming. So they get it out and then I explain it to my clients. So during the escrow, we have a ton of disclosures, and I thought we could just go through a few of those. Yeah. Okay, number one, this is a really, really, really important one, the TDS and the SPQ.
Oh.
TDS is transfer disclosure statement, and SPQ is seller property questionnaire. You don't need to know what they say. You don't need to know the title, so you don't have to memorize TDS, SPQ. Mm-hmm. Just know that these two forms are going to be filled out by the seller and sent to you, and they should be sent to you really quickly at the beginning of escrow. Mm-hmm. Now, these are the forms that the seller has to legally write down every single thing they know in their house that could decrease the value or could make it undesirable. Mm. And this is a legal obligation. This is something usually a good realtor will sit with the seller and say, look at me in the eyes. You need to be honest. Mm-hmm. If you don't know whether you should disclose something, you should disclose it.
Right, yeah.
Now, we're not going to disclose little basically it's things in the house that are an issue that could devalue value. So here's an example. Every Friday night, your neighbor, Tanner Thomason, has wild, raging parties and keeps everyone in, the block up until 5 a.m.
Oh, wow.
Do you think a seller has to legally disclose that?
I would, my gut, I don't know. I'm two ways on that. At one part, I'm like, well, that doesn't have anything to do with the physical structure of the house. But on the other side, if that's something that happens every Friday night and I'm aware of it,
right.
I guess I should disclose it.
Ding, ding, ding.
Yes.
You got it right, Tanner.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. You have to disclose if it's something that will affect someone's quiet enjoyment of the property. So, yes, if there's a noise issue in the neighborhood, yes, you have to disclose it.
Like for me specifically, I'm so close to that airport.
Right. You would disclose that there's airport noise. In my neighborhood, I even have sellers. This seems a little ridiculous, but I have sellers write down that on 4th of July and weeks leading up to it and after it, there was an extreme amount of fireworks. And I know it seems a little silly. Like, right. Yes, it's LA. There's tons of fireworks, but it is literally like well, it's not literally. Yeah. It's the opposite of literally. Yeah. It's like World War III in our neighborhood. So it's something I tell people to disclose. Other things, if you know that there's been an insurance claim against your property, this is where the seller has to disclose it. If there's ever been a meth lab on the property.
Oh, God.
I know it seems silly, right? But that happens.
Mid-century meth lab?
Yeah, it can happen. I mean, in certain parts, we don't have as much of a problem with this as we do in other states do. There's other states with huge meth problems. So if there has ever been a meth lab in a property, even if it's been remodeled, that actually can make people really sick. So that has to be disclosed. And then also, has there ever been a fire? Has there ever been water intrusion, leakage? Have you ever had any structural problems with the house? Another thing is if you are aware of any work that has been done without a permit and any modifications, remodeling, painting, anything that has been done to the house. And the reason why sellers have to disclose this is Usually people, when they do something to their house to fix it up, it's because there's been a problem.
Right.
So if on the SPQ or the TDS it says, yeah, we recently painted all of our ceilings and patched a ceiling, it's like, oh, why did you do that?
Why?
Because the roof is leaking. So even if something's been fixed, you're still supposed to disclose it.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. Later today, I'm going to go by Home Depot and I'm buying a pre-hung door because in my guest bedroom, the one that has a door to the outside, that door it's not cutting it anymore. It's warped at the bottom. It doesn't open and close freely. And so I'm going to replace that door today. Is that the sort of thing that I would need to list on?
You would just put in, replace the door. So, obviously anything the electrical and plumbing, you really want to use a licensed professional. You want to make sure they have a license. And a lot of people in LA do work without a license. Now, it's not the end of the world if you have done work without a permit, but you have to disclose that. Now, at a certain point, it's also up to the buyer to do due diligence to figure out what is going on with the house during their inspections. A lot of the time, somebody's moved into a house and work has been done, but they didn't do it themselves. They didn't get the contractor. It was before they bought the house. And in that case, it really is up to the buyer. It's up to the buyer to check for permits. It's up to the buyer to do everything they can. But if you know that there's something wrong with a house as a seller, you have to disclose it. And if you don't, you are opening yourself up to a lawsuit. So that's something that's really important. So that's the TDS, SPQ. And then some of these other little disclosures you'll get, well, I shouldn't say little, but they're short disclosures. There's usually one page. Megan's Law. Megan's Law, this is a really important one. This is a disclosure saying that you should check online. There's a website to find out if there's any convicted sexual offenders in your neighborhood. And a warning sign to parents. This is scary, but when you go and look on Megan's Law, every single block has one. It's really scary as a parent. So you want to see, and a lot of it is child molestation. So if you are buying a house, you do not want to live next door to a child molester, a convicted child molester. And what's even scarier is these are only people that have been convicted. So it really is.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Is that just a website?
You can just Google Megan's Law and you can go to the website. You can type in an address, a zip code, a name, and all the convicted sexual offenders will pop up. So you just want to be really, 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 really careful. It's this is an important one. Okay, so that's Megan's Law. Obviously, kind of a downer of a subject, but really important. So it is not up to your realtor to do this for you. And actually, some brokerages will say, don't tell them there's, if you look and it says there aren't any, but really there are. So really, it's up to the buyer. I actually personally always check, though, because I want my clients to know.
Yeah.
I would want to know.
It's very important.
Yeah, it's scary. Okay. Next up, we have a couple more disclosures that you're going to get. You're going to get a lead disclosure, asbestos, carbon monoxide smoke detector. These are generic disclosures that every real estate transaction in California is supposed to have when using these CAR forms. And basically, these are saying that the house could contain lead, it could contain asbestos, and carbon monoxide and smoke detectors are required to be put in the house before closing. If you're getting a loan, the bank, when they send their appraiser out, the appraiser will check for smoke detectors and a carbon monoxide. So that's obviously a good thing. But again, any houses in LA, older houses, lots of them have lead paint. Lots of them have asbestos. You just need to know that if you remove something, it becomes the most dangerous when it's disturbed. So asbestos, there's a lot of these old tile that have asbestos in it, ceilings, ductwork. So if it's being removed, you want to make sure a professional does it. Asbestos was declared, I guess, illegal, or they didn't stop using it in 1978. So houses before, but some of the supplies were still around. So I'd say anything after 84, 85, you're probably good. But anything before 78 most likely has asbestos. Funny story, where I grew up in northern Canada, there was an asbestos mine a few hours out of town. And the asbestos mine people came into our classroom and as children gave us all little samples of asbestos and told us what a miracle it was because it was fire resistant. That's why they use it in ceilings. That's why they used it in ductwork because it was fire resistant. So they thought it was great until many years later they found out actually it gives you cancer. So yeah, we had a little sample of asbestos that was given to us in a classroom.
Wow. That's just crazy to think
insane?
about.
It's crazy. So anyways, those are disclosures you're going to get. You're also probably going to get a brokerage disclosure from both sides of the transaction, both real estate agents, brokerages. They're kind of like our big boss. So mine's Keller Williams. We'll also have a big disclosure package, and it'll go through a ton of things. Summary is buyers and sellers, do your due diligence, do the things you're legally obligated to do. Buyer, make sure you do everything that you can to learn the condition of the house. We recommend always doing inspections. If you don't know the condition of something, make sure you get an expert out. So these are general standard disclosures. You'll get them from both sides of the transaction. And then you'll also probably get an affiliated escrow disclosure. So my Keller Williams has an in-house escrow company. And even if my client doesn't use them, we still have to disclose that we have an escrow company that's affiliated with us, even if we don't use them. So it's a one-page form. Sometimes people get confused by that. They're like, why am I signing this? We're not using this escrow company. I'm like, I don't know, but you still have to sign it.
I don't know. Just sign it and we'll move on.
Just do it. Okay, another disclosure. I know this is kind of a dry topic, guys. I'm sorry, but
that's all right.
It's important. Another one is called the AVID or the AVID. I call it the AVID. This is the agent visual inspection disclosure. Both the listing agent and the buyer's agent both fill out the same form. And what this is we walk through the property you're buying and we write down anything we see that's a defect, a hole in the wall, a scratch on the floor, a broken tile. The reason we both do this is because if you as the buyer are about to close, you do your final walkthrough and you say, hey, wait a second, there's a broken tile in the bathroom. That was never here. And the listing agent says, that was always like that. But it's not on her AVID and it's not on my AVID. It means, no, that's new damage. And the seller would have to take care of it. And as a buyer's agent, I would say, we're not closing escrow until you fix that.
Yeah.
And this has actually happened, by the way. There was a window that had a crack in it, one of my clients. And, we said that was not always there. And the listing agent said, no, that was always there. There was always a crack, but it wasn't on my AVID. It wasn't on her AVID. So this can happen. This is an important form. But again, this is your realtor's responsibility. But it's important to know what that is.
Yeah.
And also, you're going to get two forms that are almost exactly the same. And it'll be kind of confusing. Like, I thought I already signed this. No, one version is from the listing agent. One version is from the buyer's agent. These personally are my least favorite things to fill out. Because it takes, you walk through looking, is there a crack in the ceiling?
Just staring at every inch of the
staring
house.
at every inch.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, so that's another one. You're also going to get a disclosure basically saying that at the close of escrow, things like the seismic shutoff valve will be installed. The water heater needs to be double strapped. It needs to have low flow toilets. So that's another disclosure. Again, this is not all of the disclosures, but I thought I'd give us a little rundown. And I know it's a lot.
Well, it's just a whole bunch of FYI documents.
Exactly.
And you get inundated with them. I mean, I don't feel like most people even look all the way through them.
Right. And a lot of these are standard generic forms that are used in all the transactions. But it's important kind of to know why they're there. A lot of these are really just like at some point someone's been sued.
Yep, somebody got sued one time, so now you have to look at this boring document.
Right, and that's why things like on hair dryers say do not use while sleeping, because one person used it while sleeping, burnt their head, and sued a company.
That's the best time to use a hair dryer is when you're sleeping. I don't know.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. Thank you to Scott Groves from the LendLA team for the fabulous interview. And, of course, thank you to my bud, my pal, Tanner Thomason.
Well, thanks, Sarah. Thank you very much.
And thanks to CP in the control room and Mike DeLay. He's running the board,
doing whatever he does in that room over there.
We love him. Also, guys, we're starting a new segment called Ask Sarah, where you can actually click on the podcast link to our website to ask a question. You can ask me anything. Anything. It doesn't even have to be about real estate, but it would probably make more sense.
It'd
maybe
make
if it
more
was
sense, but I really do invite a random question.
I'd love any questions. I'll answer them. I'm taking on the challenge right now. But yeah, I'd love to hear your questions. Also, any topics that you want to discuss in the future. These are going to keep on coming. So thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll see you on the next one. You've been listening to the LA Real Estate Podcast.
When you've got so much house that one story won't do it, you know what you need?
What do you need, Tanner?
A second story. Here's the second story of the LendLA. Damn.